Nicole LeBlanc, for those of you who haven't met myself or my colleagues, George, Ayano, and Daniel, who are here, we are Woven Capital. We are the growth venture fund for Toyota. So we invest in industrial, mobility, as expected, and climate tech and sustainability globally. We have 16 investments to date. We're an $800 million fund, 3 of which are in Europe. The rest are in the US and Asia. And so today, I'd like to introduce my Toyota colleague. You can actually maybe give a little bit of intro on yourself. And we're going to talk today about how this group here in Europe is approaching circularity and energy, and how we're actually working with them as a venture fund, because this is one of the groups that we've worked with very successfully. So, Leon, maybe I'll let you give yourself an intro.
Thank you very much. So, Leon van der Merwe, my role in Toyota is VP of Circular Economy and Energy Business, which is really taking care of all the business model change that we need to do in Toyota to take us into the next generation. My background is very much, I'm a doer, I'm somebody who likes to get things done, so I've been involved in supply chain and after sales almost all of my life, so this is a very new world for me that I'm trying to figure out where we're going.
Great, and I can validate that he is a doer. It is fun. Thank you. It is fun to be able to work with a business unit that really has that approach. So that's great. So the first question, we have 4 questions that we're going to cover, and the first question is really around vision and strategy. And so one of the things, and we have a few slides here that we can go through briefly just for context, because it is a very complex topic. Can you really talk about Toyota Motor Europe, your energy business, and really as an OEM, how we're shifting to a mobility company and how the energy business is really going to be a key part of that? Yeah. I can go to, is it the first slide?
First slide, maybe first slide, second slide. So
yeah.
I think for us, energy business is really about feeding back into society, because one of the parts that for us in circular economy is how do we maximize the usage of our product? And as we move into the BEV environment, we've got all these batteries that sit in our vehicles, but vehicles that get used less than 1 hour a day. Then we add to this that actually the energy industry is also going through a transition. As we go into the Green Deal, green energy, the ability to produce energy has become far more unstable, because I don't know if any of you guys have yet made an investment in how to predict the weather, but if you could do that, it would solve a lot of problems, because we just don't know when the sun's going to shine, when the wind's going to blow. But then we added to the challenge that actually when the sun does shine and all the energy providers can give us energy, all the houses have got solar power, so nobody wants the energy. And then you take a battery electric vehicle, and if I take my car home this evening and I plug it into charge from just 20% charge to 80% charge, that takes almost the equivalent of 5 days energy that I would normally use in my house. And there's no predictability of when I'm going to plug in my car. So this gives the grid an enormous challenge. So we as Toyota also want to be then part of the solution. And for us, we see the solutions are, yes, we can say all the energy providers have got to keep on investing. We can say we should go to total flexible fees like Octopus is doing in the UK. But also, how do we use static and BEV batteries to be able to contribute back by doing V1G, V2G, so we can control when vehicles actually charge, but more importantly, as we move into the bidirectional, how can we extract energy out of these vehicles to support the grid in peak periods?
Great. And one of the interesting things that I've enjoyed working with Leon and his team on is the fact that this is something Toyota can't do alone, that there's multiple stakeholders. Some are utilities, some are startups, some are technology companies, and being able to pull that whole ecosystem together.
No, absolutely. Yes, because it is, you're 100% right. We can't do this alone. We don't know the energy business. But even if we do, we are not big enough as Toyota. We can be the #1 car manufacturer in the world. But actually, we are not big enough to take on this problem by ourselves, because, as you can see on the slide, in our estimation, we need 20 million BEVs connected to the grid in bidirectional charging to make a real change to support into the grid. We can't do that. That's going to be a cross-industry challenge. But also, we need to be able to touch every energy provider in Europe. So this means we need people in the middle, aggregators, who can really help us do that.
Yes. Great. So we'll move on to circularity, the other hat that you wear. Is it the slide before?
Slide before that,
There
yes.
we go. So can you really talk about, how you're approaching circularity and, really what's developed internally? What are you working with external companies on? Because I think that's a topic that a lot of us face is, we want to build it all in-house, or can we work with an external company? And how do you really go about making those decisions?
So I think it started 2 years ago when I was asked to take on this role. The CEO called me in and said, Leon, new challenge for you. You always tell me you want a new challenge. We want you to change Toyota's business model to be circular. I said, thank you. Now, where's my job description? He said, there isn't one. He said, you've only got one criteria. You have to do this in a way that this enhances the profitability of the company. Apart from that, you've got no boundaries. So really, the starting point then was to figure out what was circularity. Because I then went to all the executives in Toyota and said, great, explain to me what your expectation of circularity was. And what I very quickly figured out, everybody's definition of circularity was different. So our step one was very simple, to define circularity, which now for Toyota this means, what's on the slide, we start designing our vehicles for circularity. So it's got to start at the very early phase. We've then got to make sure in all of our EMCs or manufacturing plants that we actually, through design of vehicle, but also through design of process, eliminate all production waste. Because generally people talk about a lot of waste in the vehicle when you throw away the old vehicle. But actually in production, there are hundreds of thousands of tons of waste in our industry every year. So how do we eliminate that? How do we then maximize the usage of our vehicles? As I said earlier, our average vehicle is used less than 1 hour a day. So how do we increase that? How do we introduce, in the most profitable part of the automotive industry, which is after sales, how do we start telling ourselves, we can't sell new parts now, we've only got to sell used parts and remanufactured parts? How do we increase the cycles that our cars used to make sure that we have a level of control, not because we want to control the car, but to allow us to do the next step, which is brand new to us, to actually be involved in controlling the end of life of the vehicle. Because the big challenge we've got, if we take in the UK, an average car that reaches end of life is 22 years old. We have long lost any contact with a driver or car. But if we want to be able to take that car, dismantle it, and reuse those raw materials in our own supply chain, we need to find a way to get back control of those vehicles. And the only way to do that is staying involved in the life cycle of the vehicles. So that was my first challenge. And I always say, for the first year of my job, it was education and discussion, because this took nearly a year to agree in Toyota. And now that it's agreed, nobody agrees with it. So we've got to just drive forward in getting this. The second bit then is, maybe if you go 2 slides forward, your second half of your question, Nicole, was another slide, and I think push once, twice, it's got some animation on that shouldn't be there. So the second question was then, how do we figure out, no, one back. How do we figure out what do we do internally versus what do we do externally? And in Toyota, that's very difficult, because Toyota is known for our Kaizen, for our continuous improvement. And for us, continuous improvement always starts with what we got and how do we take it forward? How do we continuously improve that every day? And this is not just a thought process in Toyota. In every one of our factories, every week, every one of our members gets half an hour given while he's on the production floor to improve his process, with budget to go with it. So this is a living, breathing challenge we've got in Toyota. The challenge we've got with that is, when somebody then brings a big, new, bright idea, everybody just wants to Kaizen it. And the example I always use is, in the 1970s, somebody came up with this brilliant idea of, let's create the Prius. What we want is a car that is 30% more fuel efficient and 30% more spacious inside. We had two options. We could either try Kaizen the Toyota Corolla to get there, or we could do breakthrough and go, what do we do right at the end? And then how do we, through that, come back? And this is what we've had to do with circular economy, is figure out which are the bits we need to Kaizen. So how do we design a car for circularity? That's Kaizen. We've got 100,000 engineers that sit, and only thing they do is think about is how to design a car. So this is just about giving them slightly different KPIs, and that whole machine moves. But if we look at something like end-of-life vehicles, actually, we've got no idea how to do this. We know everything on how to make a car with love. We've got no idea how to rip that car apart at its end of its life. So this is where we need to bring outsiders in. Or within the energy business, we know how to make sure our battery can be used. We know how to put a bidirectional charger in our cars. What we don't know is how to link that car into the grid. And this for us is very much the way of we look at what do we do internally, what do we do externally. So I hope that answers your question.
It did. One question that I have for you is, how do you tie the two sides of your business together? Is there any tie between your energy team and your circularity team, or do you have them set up as separate streams? So because those are very strong innovation agendas within Toyota. So how are you actually executing on that?
So at a management level, they've both got a responsibility for both sides. At an operational level, they believe they're in isolated bundles because I need to keep them focused on solving their problem. Because I started this discussion by saying I'm very much a doer. And in being a doer, the key thing I've learned in all my time in doing this is only two things my team really care about. First one is that they are empowered to do what they want. Second one is that I keep them focused and I keep the message consistent in what they've got to do. And that's really the aim of keeping them at the bottom, more isolated, is to keep them consistent in their own little bubble, solving their own little problems to be able to go forward. But the higher you go up in the organization, the more they've got to look cross-versely at what they do.
And that's how you protect them?
That's how I protect them to a degree, yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. So this next slide, I think, is really relevant for a lot of the people here in the room, and it's where we're spending most of our time with you, is startups aren't going to solve all of your problems, but they can help with some, whether it's either just through learnings or it's through actual collaborations. So can you maybe give us a few examples of lessons learned from startups? How do you structure those relationships? You know, what are some of the things that you're really excited about working with startups, and maybe what are some of the challenges?
I think the first one is really, as Toyota, I always tell my team, we operate like a startup in Toyota, which in the Toyota world is most probably very true. But in the world of startup, it's not, because I'm a startup, that my father is the bank manager, and therefore, actually, I'm not really a startup, because I've got limited cash. All I've got to do is ask nicely. So therefore, we've got to look out. So some of the things we've really learned in Toyota, we are terrified of failure. So the first thing really we've got to teach our people is that it's okay to fail. And again, and live with the tension of failure. And this is one of the things that really I've learned through some of the startups and some of the companies, and Nicole spoke earlier, that they've invested in, is these innovators, these startup people who do startups, they live with this tension every day. They wake up in the morning thinking, am I going to survive today? They go to bed saying, how am I going to survive tomorrow? And in Toyota, we don't have that. So how do I artificially bring it back into the world? So a little bit, we've got something that we've implemented called intentional pause. That actually, we periodically just tell the teams, turn around and say, okay, everything's changed, stop away, and come back and re-justify this project, otherwise we're going to stop it. So how do we bring that tension back in? I think the other one is really most startups, and I was delighted to hear it today in a few of the discussions, starts with what is the customer need? Because again, as a giant, it's very easy to turn around, well, the customer will buy what we give them. But actually, the whole world revolves around what the customer needs. And it's great to talk to a lot of startups that constantly remind us, customer, 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 because otherwise it doesn't work. I think personally for me, one of the things that I love and get so inspired when I talk to them is a single-minded purpose. That when a person is doing a startup, everything in life is single-minded. It's all about doing that. My life, I wake up this morning and maybe I'm going to talk about battery recycling. Maybe I'm going to talk about next generation battery. Maybe I'm just going to come do a conference like this. And actually, I don't think about much. All it, I've got this luxury that actually I can allow my mind to wander. In startups, you can't do that. And again, this is part of my reason for creating these little pods in our business, is that they've got a single-minded purpose to solve a problem. And I think the last one is all about, again, accountability. As I said, my father's the bank manager. I don't have a lot of accountability. I go in, and if I ask nicely in the right way, I can get multi-millions. Don't want to say no accountability, because there's absolutely accountability to it, but it's not the same accountability as I put my house on the line and everything else to be able to do it. And therefore, again, the accountability in startups of really saying, actually, I've got to make every last little bit count, to me, is quite phenomenal. And it's probably one of the reasons that doesn't matter how much I say I want to start up a startup, that always makes me take a genuine step back, because that's absolute commitment. And I think you should never underestimate that in all of your clients, because that is what makes success or failure. The ability to identify, we've got a problem that needs to be solved, and I'm going to commit my whole life to solving that, is phenomenal. And to me, that's what I look, when Nicole sometimes introduces me to some startups and all the rest. To me, it's a very simple job. I just look in their eye, and what I want to see from them is, are they convinced they are going to solve the problem? If they are, half my selection process of dealing with them is already done. Because actually, the process is just time. But are they there really to stick it out? That's what it's all about.
Great. And our last question is really to just engage the room a little bit, and so we have some follow-up conversations afterward. So, for all the VCs and corporates in the room, what do you want, them to take away from your journey and what you've been doing inside of Toyota? And as mentioned, with both energy and circularity, those are things we can't do alone. So is there any call to action, or is there anything that you're looking for in the next kind of 18 to 24 months? Like, can we start to think about, collaborating with some of the people in the room? Are there portfolio companies or other referrals they can make if they're thinking about the same thing?
I think, can we go back to a few slides here? If we look at this slide, I think, for me, the learning in a lot of doing circularity, this is not sexy work. This is basically, circularity is now, as my wife likes now to call me, I'm just a sophisticated dustbin man. That's it. But that's the truth of the industry. It is not a sexy industry. It's not AI. It's not the next tech bubble. It's not anything else. But without this transition, the previous discussion we had about sustainability and looking at the future of this planet, there is not a future if we can't crack this one. So I think my first request to everybody in this room is, please don't forget to invest in the bread and butter companies, the people who are really on the ground that are doing the hard work, because that is what's going to give that loop. How do you eliminate waste? Well, it's very simply looking at every process and say, how do we use a little bit less tomorrow than we use today? And that takes time and it takes determination. How do we increase the usage of the vehicles? How do we introduce used parts? Again, it's just about very practical implement of new ways of running old businesses. And this is, to me, the biggest challenge we've got in circularity. It is not a sexy thing. Reducing CO2, there's all sorts of fancy tech ways we can do this. We can redesign the engine, we can do this, we can do that. Here, I'm average dismantling 22-year-old cars that were designed 35 years ago, before anybody cared really about what we were doing. And yes, in designing the cars, this will solve it, but that's for another 35 years there. We can't wait that long. So that's, I think, my first real practical request. I think the second one is, I think what we've touched on a little bit is, we can't do this on our own. So please, every time somebody brings an idea to you, if you're not interested, share it amongst your colleagues. Share it amongst us, because we have to do this together. I'll use a very simple, practical example. There's current legislation being proposed that by 2032, 6.25% of a plastic on every new car has to come from recycled plastic from an old car. That means, as Toyota Motor Europe, this is just looking at our European production, I have to have access to 500,000 dismantled vehicles worth of plastic just to get the feedstock. Then I need to find somebody to actually convert this plastic into usable plastic. Then I need to have somebody who's willing to use recycled plastic and not virgin plastic to create me parts again. All of this needs to happen, and it's very practical, tangible stuff that needs to happen. So, but that takes everybody in this room to make that work. And that's just talking about plastic, before we talk about copper, batteries, or any of the others. So I think the real message is, this has to be a common goal. And I think the last request is, most people who see sustainability, they see sustainability as a cost center. This is the reason in Toyota we have separated out sustainability and circular economy. Because there are certain things we have to do and we want to do, but they are just a cost to the business to be good for the society. This, in circularity, is an opportunity to actually genuinely enhance the profitability of a company going forward. So if we take this plastics back, we are busy doing a pilot now. We've opened a recycle factory in the UK where we will do all of this, where we can actually halve the costs of our plastics going into our vehicles by doing a closed loop plastic recycling process. That is big money for a company like Toyota. If you think every vehicle has 260 kilograms of plastic, and for every kilogram of plastic I can pay 50 cents, and we make 10 million vehicles a year, suddenly that becomes big, big money. But it's big, big money through a supply chain. And that's why we need everybody involved.
Great. So one final comment on the venture capital side is, we really enjoy working with executives like Leon, because this is not necessarily the typical executive you find in a large corporate. So we've been able to find the gems of people who really approach problems this way and really want to think about how to truly solve the problem. And it's really great for us. So our model is that we have the investments team, but we also have what we call the portfolio success team. And they're co-located and embedded within some of the Toyota business units. So they're able to interact with Leon and his team on a more regular basis to be able to give us those insights, which make us a better investor, because then I can go hunting. If I'm just out there talking about sustainability companies and talking to sustainability companies, and I keep bringing them to Leon, but they're not exactly what he wants, it's a long time of trial and error. Yeah. But if we actually have people that are, interacting with his team on a regular basis, we actually become really good hunters, because then I can go and find exactly what he's looking for. And even if we don't end up investing, they might still collaborate with him, they might still work with them, and we're continuing to learn as part of that process. So I really feel that as a CVC, we're getting the best of both worlds, where we have the financial returns and we're an independent fund, yet we get this army of amazing engineers and experts to be able to help us, help our companies and help us be better sourcers of deals. So it's really exciting what we're doing with the model, and we're really happy to be working with teams like Leon.
And if we can add on to that one from our side, is we are a bunch of engineers. Most of the people who I work with have never read a P&L. They don't understand what a P&L is, and actually, it's probably the worst thing you could ever threaten them with is that you're going to sit them down and force them to read a P&L. So to be able to turn around and have a team like Nicole's and saying, we need to consider what we want to do this, can you take that burden off us and tell us, is this a good investment before we even start considering it, is an enormous benefit back to us. Because again, it comes back down to the thing, I can keep my team focused on solving the problem, not trying to figure out, is this a good company or not? So it's something that works very, very well together.
And because we're at the growth stage, we're dealing with companies that have a product, that have revenue. Sometimes they even have profit. It's very exciting. They even pay taxes. But what we can do is, if it's not a fit, for us to invest, Toyota has an M&A team. Toyota has balance sheet investment capabilities. So then we can then hand that over and assist with those other pockets of money and be able to help Leon and his teams find the right places to be able to find the right way to engage with external startups and companies. So we'll be around, so if you have any questions, feel free to reach out, and always happy to discuss this further. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Nicole.